So you're going to want to open it up carefully and look for these 4 screws. You can take them out in any particular order, but those are the 4 that you need to take off next. So we do the first screw, the second one, the third one, and finally the 4th. Okay, now that you got the screws off, make sure you take off the plate. And we're going to be removing these LCD cables. I use my fingernail, thumbnail, but if you don't have any, then use a little spudger, but don't use anything metal. Make sure it has to be plastic, otherwise you could short out the motherboard. And after you get these 3 flex cables unplugged, you can remove the entire LCD housing away from the motherboard. And after it's removed, if you look at the top left of the iPhone, there's 5 screws that secure this part of the motherboard to the main housing. I like to start with the bottom 2 screws right here so that you can remove this little metal plate afterwards, and just set these aside for later. And now you remove the top 3 screws, because when we're finished, we can remove this entire piece away from the motherboard. But before you can continue onward, you want to make sure, if you look at these 2 screws, they're actually screwed into the housing of the motherboard. So you want to make sure you remove those too. So with the addition of these 2 screws, this should make for a total of 7 screws on this piece. And afterwards, you can remove this whole little plate thing. Make sure you unplug the little flex cable right here. And now you'll see, here's the final screw, which secures the motherboard to the housing of the entire iPhone. And then if you look to the right a little bit, there's 4 more screws. The 4th of which, on the bottom, you'll see you need a different adapter for your screwdriver, because it doesn't just take a traditional Phillips style. So we'll remove the first one, the second one, and then to get the third one, it's kind of like those other 2 that were screwed into the housing on the last piece. So get that one out and watch out for that little metal piece that comes off with it. And now you can take off, this is basically one of the main screws that hold the motherboard down to the housing. And if you look over to the right next to the camera, there's 2 more screws right here. And they hold down the most annoying piece out of the entire iPhone. And I say this because it just is springy, it flies everywhere. If you're not careful, you can lose it. And it's actually a pretty important piece, because if you look right here, you'll see there's a little resistor right on the inside of it. So it's a pretty important piece, but you wouldn't think so just by looking at it. And you see the orientation, there's the Apple logo right there. Okay, now we can unplug the camera flex cable. And before you can just remove the entire motherboard away from the housing, you want to make sure that you unplug this little antenna cable right here. And take note of the small little clips that it hooks into on the right half of the motherboard, because it has little inserts where it pops into the side of it. So you want to make sure that you pull those out without ruining the cable. It's very fragile. Okay, now that you have your motherboard out, we're going to do the same thing to our one with the good screen. Take our good motherboard and just work backwards from how we started. So we'll replace the motherboard into the housing right here, reattach the antenna cable into those little slots I was mentioning, and then make sure to plug it in up at the top. And then I like to start with the bottom after this point and plug in that little bottom flex cable, and carefully plugging in the other coaxial cable at the bottom there. Shouldn't be using metal tweezers, but if you're careful, it works. Okay, then plugging in the flex cable at the top left. This kind of just gives it a little bit more support when you go to put the screws back in. And don't forget that you need this middle screw first before you can continue onward. And after replacing the plate into its original spot, what I typically do is replace those 2 screws first. And if it's easier, you can kind of hold it at a little bit of an angle so you can get a better grip on it. But then we're going to screw in these 3 screws again. And finally, replace that little metal connector that goes over the top of the flex cable and screw that in too. Next, we'll replace that screw that needs a different tip than the camera screw. And when you go to put this piece on here, Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky, so what I like to do is use some tweezers and just kind of put it into place first, and then follow it up by putting the first screw into the housing before putting the one into the actual motherboard right there, as you can see I just did. Now just plug in the camera flex cable and return to that little springy metal piece that I showed you earlier. It has the resistor in it and a small little Apple logo. If you don't remember the orientation that it's supposed to fit in there, if you look closely at the Apple logo, it's supposed to point upward so that it's not upside down, and then just sort of kind of wiggle it in there. I know it's weird, but once you actually go to do it, it'll make more sense. Now that all that's connected, position the screen back to how it was when you first took it off and reconnect the 3 flex cables. You can see they're kind of stacked on top of each other, so you'll know which ones to connect first. Okay, and after that, take the little metal plate that secures the LCD flex cables down and just kind of position it in place. As long as you just get one screw into that metal plate, the rest will kind of line up a lot easier. Otherwise, it's kind of loose and just kind of hangs out there on top. So if you have a hard time, just make sure you get one screw in, and the rest will be easier to do. Okay, so now we replace a screw on the right-hand side next to the SIM card tray. And finally, plugging back in the battery connection before screwing the metal plate over the top of it that will secure it down and make sure that nothing ever comes unplugged again. Now all that's left to do is to just close it up, make sure you get it snugged all the way down, screw in the last 2 screws that connect the top half to the bottom half of the iPhone, and we are good to go. I'm going to give a huge shout out to the Beat Menace for giving me the track to use over the top of this video, and many more to come. You'll find links to his YouTube channel and website in the description, so definitely go check out everything he has to offer. Make sure you subscribe to get all the latest and greatest from Ghostly Hacks. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. I'm pretty good about responding in a short amount of time. Other than that, see you next time.